Hello everyone and welcome back to Why the Hell Do We Care? Today we are talking about our latest recruits and I have something special for our new fair-haired white knight. First, let's get started with our lovely lady from Shu. Young is a very speedy speed type. Her moveset is built to demolish large groups of weak enemies. Her entire S string hits in a pretty wide area and even finishes with an attack that hits all around her. Charge attack wise, her C4 hits a very wide area and knocks enemies back, so it is good if you need some breathing space. Her C5 is her officer killer attack. It doesn't hit in a wide area, but it does hit multiple times after launching an enemy up into the air. Her C6 is also very useful in clearing out an area since it hits in a large area and hits multiple times. I don't know how to really describe her ground R1 attack, then it's like the Sonic the Hedgehog spin dash attack. Her air R1 is a pretty air combo to ground pound finisher. Her Musashi is also designed toward taking down officers as it is an unblockable throw attack with some good damage. Her passive is Fortune, which improves the quality of weapons and items you find, so she is useful for finding good gear. Overall, Young is very good at taking down waves of enemies, however her attack and defense are fairly weak, so she suffers when dueling enemy officers. It is unknown when Lianchi was born, but she debuted in Dynasty Warrior 7. Also known as Lady Boom, she met Sun Quan as she and her mother were fleeing to Jiangdong. Apparently Sun Quan saw her and immediately made her his wife on the spot. In the games, she starts out as Sun Shangjiang's handmaiden and fights alongside her mistress. This partly comes from how it was said that Shangjiang had her handmaidens dressed in full armor and weaponry. When Sun Shangjiang marries Liu Bei and leaves for Shu, Lianchi stays behind to support Sun Quan. At some point unspecified in the game, she marries Sun Quan and supports him throughout the Wu campaign. Personality-wise, I'd say she is the mother figure of the Sun family, always kind and supportive to her husband and his allies. Now let's see how she aims her crossbow. Lianchi is a technique type that seems to wield what I can only describe as a crossbow shotgun. Her S-string attacks don't have the wide hit area that Huang Zhang's bow did, but she makes up for that with full frontal stopping power. Her C4 has a lot of strength behind it, although it does have a bit of downtime as she reloads, so watch out there. Her C5 has her attack in the 4 cardinal directions and then follow up with an EX attack that has a nice area of effect to hit all the knocked up opponents. Her C6 is probably her biggest area attack, but it still isn't that wide an area. Her ground R1 heals a decent chunk of life and stuns enemies around her. Her aerial R1 is pretty nice, rapid shot aerial attack that hits a decent amount of times. Her Musashi is a pretty good crowd demolisher as she attacks with what looks like a giant cluster of water arrows that can take out a decent sized area. Her passive is technique, so all her fellow technique types get a boost to all their stats while in her group. Overall, Lianchi is a solid range character, but be careful about getting hit from the side since her crowd clearing abilities is lower than others. Miyamoto Musashi was born in 1584 AD and was first playable in Samurai Warriors 2. Musashi is considered one of Japan's greatest swordsmen and is known for his famous duels and writing the Book of Five Rings, which details his dual sword-wielding style. He's kind of the father of dual-wielding in Japan, so all you anime fans who love seeing dual-wielding katanas have him to thank for it. In the Samurai Warriors games, the battles he appears in fluctuate a lot. In Samurai Warriors 4, he only really appears in one minor battle alongside Kanbei. He is also heavily tied to Kojiro Sasaki, whom Musashi defeated and killed in one of his famous duels. Personality-wise, he is a very eager individual who always strives to be the best swordsman and challenges anyone he thinks will help him grow as a swordsman. He is also a bit arrogant, as the Japanese on the back of his coat roughly translates to unmatched under heaven. Now let's see how the greatest swordsman proves his worth. Musashi is a power type and pretty much the 1v1 duelist of the Samurai Warriors cast. His S-string is very quick and forward focused and actually moves him forward quite a bit. His C2 combo is a very potent officer killer as it's primarily an aerial combo, so it's harder to get knocked out of. His C3 is decent, but nothing really spectacular in my opinion. The C4 is his best crowd clearing move, but it doesn't have very good range, so you're going to have to be careful with it. But it also can do good damage against officers. His R1s are alright damaging moves, but nothing really spectacular in my opinion. His Musou is both good and bad. It's good in that it does pretty good damage and hits many times. It's bad in that he is completely stationary while doing it, so if you whiff, there is no real correcting it. His passive is Potence, which increases his already good attack power. Overall, if you want an officer dead, Musashi can make him that way in a very effective manner. His range is a bit short, so that can cause issues in crowds, but he 1 vs 1s like a champ. It is unknown when Goemon Ishikawa was born, but he was one of the original samurai warriors. Goemon was kind of a Japanese Robin Hood, who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. It was also rumored that he was a renegade Iga ninja. Quite a bit of his appearances involve him following Okuni and trying to win her heart, or showing up to steal something on the battlefield. He is pretty quick to get jealous whenever any male character attempts to talk to Okuni in his usual comedic, bumbling fashion. Historically, Goemon was executed by Hideyoshi for trying to steal his treasure, and Goemon was boiled alive for his crime. Personality-wise, Goemon can best be described as a vain, bumbling thief. He thinks he is the king of thieves, but usually ends up screwing up somewhere in his plans. Now let's see how that Mason Cannon of his work. Goemon is a technique type, and he is not a very good one. On most ranked lists I have seen, Goemon usually takes the slot of worst character in the game. For starters, he is a slow but powerful type of character that isn't a power type. This means it's very easy to get knocked out of his power attacks. Second, his S-string range is pretty low for his type of character. Thirdly, his charge attacks are pretty slow to come out, and aside from his C4, they really aren't very wide hitting, and even C4 has a few short range hits before actually going wide. His ground R1 is pretty awkward to aim since it hits off in a diagonal and only a bit actually hits directly in front of him. His air R1 is also fairly eh. It's a 2-hit air combo that doesn't do all that much. Finally, his Musou attack is so slow that in duel mode he only has enough time to attack twice before his gauge runs out. His one saving grace is his multi-butt stomp attack that he can just spam over and over again. His passive is Bounty, which increases the number of gems acquired after battle, which is nice if you are having money issues, I suppose. Overall, odds are you are better off looking for another character to fill your slow but powerful needs. Now we come to Nemea. Nemea isn't from any of the Warriors games. He is in fact from a completely different game from the same company called Trintiy, Souls of Zill Oll. Normally I would talk about the character, but I feel like that wouldn't do it justice, so instead we are going to be taking a look at the game he is from. Trintiy, Souls of Zill Oll, was released in 2011 and is actually the third game in the Zill Oll series. We just never got the other two games. Trintiy is actually a prequel to the original Zill Oll, which was on the good old PlayStation 1. From the few blurry screenshots I could find, it looks like it was more of a traditional RPG where you make a hero, quest across the land, kill bad dudes. Trintiy, however, is much more similar to the Warrior series, but is more of an action RPG instead of an action game with RPG elements, if that makes any sense. The story is, well, it's pretty generic and nothing really new. Sir Dark Lord, ruler of the evil empire, heard a prophecy that he was going to be killed by his own grandson. And since there's no time like the present, he killed his pregnant daughter and his son, who already had a child with an elf. The son, Arius, of course survives the slaughter of his family and grows up being trained as a gladiator, all the while growing a raging hate boner for his dear old granddad. He is joined by a friendly giant and a sullen vampire woman, and they go on adventures chasing a magical MacGuffin that can kill Sir Dark Lord. Now you may be wondering, where the hell is Nemea? I thought this section was about him. He got brought to the Orochi games and yet he doesn't seem to play an integral part to the story. Well, Nemea is in there, it just takes him a while to show up. Like 75% of the way through the game is when he finally shows his shiny head. This is part of that whole prequel thing. From what I understand, he was a major character in the original, and this game mainly sets up his character for that game. He too is a grandson of Sir Darklord by way of the pregnant princess. A wandering elf happened upon her and pretty much pulled him out of her dead body with magic and raised him as his own. Nemea also has his own party of adventurers that you hear about through a good portion of the game, until he finally shows up to join forces with Ares to kill Sir Darklord. Spoiler alert, they kill Sir Darklord, but Magical MacGuffin wipes out Ares' entire existence, and Nemea inherits Sir Darklord's empire. I'll admit, I mainly got the game back when I started this LP series because I was curious on where the hell Nemea came from, so I was a bit disappointed with the lack of him. This really shouldn't be held against the game, really, but it did kinda annoy me. Gameplay-wise, it both is and isn't like Warriors Orochi. Like Warriors Orochi, you control 3 characters and can swap to them whenever in combat. Everyone has 2 sets of 3 slots to put attacks in that are mapped to the square, triangle, and circle button, and you can swap between sets at the push of the R2. Attack combos can use 3 different attacks before you have to start up a new combo. And everyone has an attack like Dynasty Warriors S-String, but they have varying lengths depending upon the character. The other attacks are more like the charge attack finishers. The main standout in the combat for me is the rush and break systems. A lot of the stronger enemies don't respond to your attacks unless you are hitting them when they are vulnerable after an attack and the rush symbol shows up around them. If you hit them with an element they are weak to during this time, they get stunned so you can get some extra hits in. Hit them even harder while they are stunned and they break, stunning them longer and lowering their defenses. Pretty much the system rewards you for using all your character's different skills and recognizing their strengths and weaknesses. For example, Ares specializes in fire attacks, has 1 or 2 ice spells, and is the only one to get dark elemental skills. There is a finishing move that works on low health enemies that have been stunned, but there are only like 2 unique finishers in the game and the rest are generic. Everyone else attacks the camera, so it's not really worth mentioning. The game also allows you to use your skills to manipulate the environments in some way, like using Ares' Ice Mist spell in water will completely freeze the area and any enemies in it. Unfortunately, I don't think they did enough with this idea, since outside of knocking pillars and scaffolding down, most of the environments are only affected by Ares, so it kind of a letdown. I did start to suffer from long game exhaustion by the end. Partially from my obsession with doing side quests, which there are a ton of in this game, and partially from a lack of variation in the endgame enemies, and no real need for new attacks or tactics showing up. I'd say roughly 2/3 of the way through, most players will have figured out the best way to fight everything. This will make battles a bit boring when you already know how to stun-lock enemies into oblivion. There's also a rather lacking amount of unique bosses. I can pretty much count those on my hand with a couple fingers missing. Most of the non-human bosses turn to very common enemies as you progress, only to be replaced with the same guy but different color or bigger. The major bosses are actually interesting fights though, since they don't really have weaknesses you can exploit, so you have to fight them the hard way. I think a special mention should be made for the title system in the game. In most games you kill enough goblins, you get a special title in a menu and some bonus and that's it. In Trintiy, whenever you enter a bar or a shop, you get to call one of your titles from the list randomly. It's a small thing, but I like the touch of people in the world recognizing my achievements. Overall, the game is average. It's not a bad game by any means. I think it hits the points it wants to and doesn't try to stretch beyond it. It just wasn't reaching very far. The combat has a couple interesting points, but doesn't really push anything. The story was competently told, but doesn't tell some new tale I haven't heard before. And the music was alright. I'm not really going to be trying to put it on my MP3 player or anything. However, I did find some interesting enjoyable points in the game. It's fairly cheap for $20 on the PSN, and for what it's worth, I thought it was alright and I certainly didn't feel like I wasted my money. But the game isn't the main subject of this video. Let's see how the originally unplayable Nemea carries on his game's legacy. Nemea is a technique-type spear wielder who loves his wide area attacks. His S-string hits in a good range and even finishes up with a nice ground explosion for some style points at the end. His C2 EX attack both hits in a wide area and it looks pretty cool while performing it. His C3 is good for fighting officers as it both stuns and hits multiple times. His C4 keeps on making me think he is actually a power type by how he just power throws his spear and follows it up with a nice big shoulder tackle. His C5 can act as both a launcher and a crowd clearer as it hits all around him, and his C6 is a pretty good charging attack. His R1s are pretty good too, with a nice laser attack for the ground and a charged lightning spear for his aerial. His Musou is pretty much just him charging his spear and chucking that son of a bitch as hard and far as he can, and has a pretty impressive range on it. His passive is Trintiy, which is good for getting multiple triple attacks out in a map. Overall, Nemea is a very solid character who kicks a lot of ass, showing the true might of the Denskull Emperor. And with that, it's time to say goodbye. Next time we will be doing our best to free our friends from Kiyomori's demonic mind control. I'm Rihanna Bahamut, and I hope to see you all there.